through their proxies, in this instance, Republic Bank. By the way, do you know that we own between 26 to 30% of Republic Bank?
Citizens.
Yes, we own between 26 and 32% of Republic Bank. But it is that very Republic Bank that has taken a decision to cut, to reduce credit purchases by citizens $10,000 to $5,000 by 50%. What impact this will have on the country, the people, economic activity? This morning we have with us my honorable colleague, Damian Leiter, Senator Damian Leiter. I want to say on behalf of our political leader, we welcome all of you to this press conference to lead off on the foreign exchange, the artificial foreign exchange crisis brought about by the recent decision by Republic Bank to cut by half that credit purchase arrangements. The first person we have to address this matter is no other than Senator the Honorable Damian Leiter. After he would have been through, I will in fact bring you up to speed with some of the challenges that we are facing as we address this issue of NICWAN in limbo. We'll talk more about that as we proceed. At this time, may I take this opportunity to invite Senator Damian Leiter to address you. Damian Leiter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Senator Mark, and thank you for that very warm introduction. I would firstly like to say good morning and welcome the media who are with us here today. I would like to also say good morning to those who are listening online via social media, and good morning to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago who are currently under siege by this PNM government. As Senator Mark indicated, we as the government in waiting, we as the next government, we seek to bring the issues that are impacting the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We seek to bring these issues to light on a weekly basis at our weekly press conferences. And today is another such day where we expose and we highlight critical issues that are impacting the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, their lives and their livelihoods. And in fact, a critical blow was struck to the citizens of this country, and more in particular, SMEs, small, medium and micro enterprises in this country, when last week we would have witnessed across all three newspapers seeing Republic Bank, one of our key banks and institutions in this country, slash our credit card limits on each cycle from $10,000 down to $5,000. And so this further exacerbates the difficulties that citizens, and in particular small, medium and micro enterprises in this country, experience in acquiring the necessary foreign exchange to conduct their businesses, to purchase raw materials, to purchase goods for sale in their stores, their retail outlets, etc. And many of these companies who are struggling to get foreign exchange through the regular system, through banks, have depended on these credit cards simply for their businesses to survive. And in light of this, ladies and gentlemen, the Minister of Finance was put on spotlight last week by my colleague in the lower house, MP Devendranath Tanku, when MP Tanku seek to put the minister on the spot to ask the minister to account for this foreign exchange crisis today, seeing a major institution like Republic Bank slash their credit card limits for US dollars in half. And then we had to listen the very next day to the Minister of Finance, Minister Con Imbert, where he indicated, and I quote, that it was an explosion in online shopping in the past several years, which has created this shortage in the supply of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. This minister also tries to gaslight the public into believing that the challenges of supplying foreign exchange is born out of an economy that is moving forward, an economy that is growing and advancing, saying that businesses are requiring more and more foreign exchange as we see manufacturing increase, exports increase. This is what the minister states is the reason for this shortfall. And the minister goes even further to indicate and to point a finger at businesses, stating that businesses are not repatriating their foreign exchange to the local economy at the rate that the minister so desires. So, we have listened to these excuses. I put it to you that this is disingenuous coming from the minister. We are here to point out that the minister is not being truthful in his public proclamations and accusations regarding the Trinidad and Tobago foreign exchange crisis that we are experiencing here today. We ask Minister Imbert, does he think the people of Trinidad and Tobago are fools? Does he think that the business owners in this country, the small, medium, and micro enterprises in this country, does he think they are uneducated fools to believe that this is the excuse for a shortage of foreign exchange today? You see, ladies and gentlemen, all of the twistings and spinning by this Minister of Finance, who is backed up against a corner now, would make any person believe that the current foreign exchange crisis is not as a result of maladministration by the PNM government and their actions over the last 8 years. However, if you do not rely, if you, the population, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, do not rely on the minister's interpretation of economics here today, you will know that there is far more in the mortar than the pestle as it pertains to the foreign exchange crisis that we have in Trinidad and Tobago today, as well as the declining economy in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm going to go into that now. You see, the reality is that the PNM economics cannot escape the blaring numbers we have in front of us. The numbers that are exposed to economists, the numbers that are exposed to the business community. It is very straightforward. Unlike the Minister of Finance, who gives you a flippant excuse for foreign exchange shortage in this country, we in the United National Congress do our research to indicate what the problem is, to see why we are in this position today. So when doing our research, we can compare the years gone by. In 2015, this is important numbers to understand, our gross domestic product stood at United States dollars $26.85 billion. But by 2019, under this PNM administration, and let me highlight, before the COVID pandemic, it reduced, our gross domestic product reduced to US $23.68 billion. That is over $3 billion US dollar reduction, Senator Mark. But it gets worse than this, because by the end of 2022, when this government boasts of things getting so well, our GDP reduces further to $22.17 billion US dollars. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go further. Non-energy exports in September 2015 were worth $704 million US dollars of revenue coming in. This is under Kamala Persad-Bissessar administration. And by the end of 2019, under this PNM administration, and before COVID, it reduced drastically to $435.5 million US dollars. And after 3 years of huffing and puffing and boasting by this administration that non-energy exports had increased, manufacturing had increased, we see that as of March 2023, non-energy exports stood at $450 million US. So Senator Mark and the population, we have an overall reduction of almost $300 million US in revenue coming into this country via exports to the foreign markets. So we have to understand why these numbers are so important when you listen to the minister's excuses. We need to be able to look at the past where the Minister of Finances, we have to look past the Minister of Finance's veiled excuses for government non-performance. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2015, Trinidad and Tobago's net official foreign reserves stood at $9.93 billion US. By 2019, our foreign reserves declined drastically to $6.92 billion US. And as of 2022, it declined further to $6.83 billion US. So this is over $3 billion US in foreign reserves wipe out under the hands of the People's National Movement. You see, ladies and gentlemen, these indicators clearly tell us that the issue of foreign exchange is not an increase in demand of online shoppers. It is not as a result of this drastic increase in the requirement of foreign exchange for raw materials to increase manufacturing in this country. Our current shortage in foreign exchange, and let me be categorically clear here now, today, our current shortage is due to a collapse of supply of foreign exchange, a collapse in foreign exchange revenues coming into our country, brought about by People's National Movement incompetence in government. This has not been an overnight collapse in the economy, ladies and gentlemen. I showed you, Senator Mark and the population, where this happened before the COVID pandemic. This was happening before the COVID pandemic. And it continues to get worse under this government. It wasn't a part of this COVID pandemic. So how have we slipped into this mess today? How have we arrived at this situation today? It is easy for us to say it is poor administration from the PNM, but we must give you facts. Not FAX, but FACTS. We must give you the facts. Let me start off with there are many issues and many reasons why we have lost foreign exchange in this country. But I'm going to highlight some of the major issues here today. The most pivotal event, of course, and the population knows of it, in case you were at your fridge and you didn't hear and you didn't see it happen and the fridge door closed, I'll remind you. But it was the closure of the Petrotrin refinery. This was a national asset that was earning upwards of over $350 million in revenue per annum until its closure, Senator Mark. This is a proven revenue earner for the Trinidad and Tobago economy, a regular foreign exchange earner wiped out by the PNM. It was an entity that paid over $20 billion in taxes between 2010 and 2015 under the People's Partnership led by Kamla Persad-Bissessar. Petrotrin's role in bolstering the national's economy should never be belittled by anyone in this country today, no matter how much PNM tries to twist, turn, and spin this. And while Statoil and Petrojam refineries in Suriname and Jamaica have been refining and taking advantage of the global prices, the high global prices through 2022, this government keeps our greatest national asset in the garage, using it as a political football, promising to give this to a local company that only the PNM could do it. You think UNC could do it? Only the PNM could do it. And then their promises never materialize. And we now see Petrotrin sitting down in a scrap iron heap, Senator Mark. Another factor impacting the shortage or causing the shortage of US foreign exchange in this country today is this government's failing in the business environment today. Because of the decimation of the ease of doing business in this country by the PNM, many foreign companies are staying away from our shores. Many of those who are here have left in droves Already in Trinidad and Tobago, under this PNM government, we have seen more than 1.7 billion US dollars in foreign direct investment exit our shores. We've seen the likes of ArcelorMittal, Lever Brothers, and 1/3 of the Point Lisas industrial estate shut their doors, leave our country, and many more preparing to do so. These and many other companies would bring in foreign exchange annually to this economy. And when we see the complete collapse of the tourism sector in Trinidad and Tobago, where we see arrivals, international arrivals to Tobago decline by more than 70% under this government, we look forward to hear what the current numbers are. But on last count, there was more than 70% decline in international arrivals into Tobago. That is foreign exchange that we are not bringing into our country. When we see the overall decline in net exports in this country, this amplifies the lack of foreign exchange that we are bringing in revenues into this country. And of course, the epitome of this government is their failure to diversify our economy outside of the oil and gas sector. That and many other issues sum up the reason why we are in this foreign exchange crisis here today. Our foreign exchange crisis cannot be blamed on consumers purchasing goods online. It cannot be blamed for manufacturers who are selling less today than they did back between 2010 and 2015. It is clearly as a result of the failure of this government to manage this economy, both the energy sector, the non-energy sector, the tourism sector, et al. In this country. Ladies and gentlemen, a harsh climate for business locally, with foreign exchange shortages, administrative nightmares with the ease of doing business getting worse. Who do you think this impacts the most in this country here today? Yes, it affects all of us in the country. We can all agree that it is more difficult to operate in this country today than it has ever been. But the multinationals, the conglomerates, the newly minted monopolies in this country who already operate in Trinidad and Tobago, they have the flexibility to maneuver, to get through, to get around, and navigate through this maze of stagnation and poor administration by this government. They are the ones that are getting preference today for US dollars in the banks. When they're getting millions of dollars in foreign exchange from the banks, it is the small, micro, and medium enterprises in this country that will continue to feel that squeeze. The conglomerates are getting their foreign exchange. When it comes to consumer products, more and more we are seeing the development of oligarchies. More and more we are seeing the development of monopolies in this country, Senator Mark. As the large companies dominate the market and the small and medium companies continue to get pushed further and further out of business. When you consider the small sole traders, the small traders, the medium-sized importers and manufacturers, they have to go begging to the banks every week for $300, $500, $800, $1,000 when they need thousands of dollars to operate in their business and grow. And you know, the thing that puzzles me about this, about any responsible government, about this government, any responsible government would understand the importance of small, medium, and micro enterprises to any economy. Because let me tell you, the SMEs account for over 30% of our GDP. There are thousands of businesses that exist in this country, employing tens of thousands of employees through the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. SMEs put food on the table for families. SMEs contribute to sending children to schools, purchasing pharmaceuticals, critical medication for children, for grandparents. And it is a great provider of jobs to the jobless in this country. The slashing of the credit card limits, as we've seen happen here today, amongst other issues, due to this government's incompetence and mismanagement of foreign exchange and foreign exchange supplies will continue to amplify the socio-economic challenges faced by the citizens in the middle class down to the citizens who sit on the poverty line. They will all suffer as a result of this. From the sole trader to the hustlers, the suitcase traders, the back of the trunk traders, the online retailer, the small shop owner, the small manufacturer, the middle class business, the family businesses in this country. Trying to survive today has become an uphill battle for these small companies. These people have become angry. Consumers, employees, businesses alike have all become angry today because of the situation that we are in. If you want to live a quiet and comfortable life in this country, you cannot, because your disposable income is disappearing day by day. Your economic opportunities are drying up, and foreign exchange is becoming harder and harder to acquire. In the last 2 months, I could tell you from my own personal experience, in the last 2 months, it has been the most difficult 2 months in trying to acquire foreign exchange since this crisis has started under this PNM government. The cutting of these limits on these credit cards today, brought on by the shortage in foreign exchange supplies, means that it's more difficult for small manufacturers to acquire raw materials, retailers to acquire goods and services to sell. Stuff like baby formula, pharmaceuticals, basic food items that are not locally produced here. This impacts the supply of these products into Trinidad and Tobago. These manufacturers would have no choice but to pass on the costs of having to buy foreign exchange on the black market. And let me remind the population, purchasing foreign exchange on the black market is illegal. And so by the malpractice by this government, by the mismanagement by this government, almost every company in this country today is now forced to break the law just simply to survive, to purchase foreign exchange to survive. Ladies and gentlemen, so these manufacturers, when they purchase foreign exchange on the black market, have to pass on this cost to the consumer on the ground, to the mothers, to those who are vulnerable, those who sit on the poverty line. And let me tell you, students haven't gotten away from this, you know. If you are a student attempting to further your education abroad, you now have to rethink about this plan today, because many of these students depended on these credit cards to be able to study abroad. They now are going from $10,000 to $5,000 US. Any entrepreneur out there who wants to create and own a new business and enter the local market will have a mountain to climb when they are handed the short end of the stick of this foreign exchange crisis. You see, ladies and gentlemen, these are the real heartbreaking futures for many individuals, for many families and businesses in this country, when they have lost this fundamental tool of acquiring US dollars. We have seen the final death blow being handed down to the small and micro enterprises by this slash of credit cards here today. The individual consumer must suffer tighter spending habits because the PNM couldn't read a Petrotrin balance sheet properly. Businesses have to continue suffering in quiet rage because this government only has interest in those who can fund their campaigns. Let me put it to the nation today. If you don't understand the strength of SMEs, small, medium, and micro enterprises today, let me tell this nation today the real situation that is happening in Trinidad. Over 6,000 SMEs have shut their doors. Businesses have shut their doors after the COVID pandemic, and thousands more are on the brink of collapse. Over 60,000 citizens have lost their jobs, according to the central bank. And as a result of this foreign exchange crisis, we see the PNM's final blow to the SME economy here today. We expect more businesses to close as a result of what is happening with foreign exchange and the cutting of the limits with these credit cards. So we see more going to close. We see more employees that will go on the breadline. And many citizens who've relied on this credit card will go hungry. Not just angry, but they will go hungry. There is one more point I would like to make, Senator Mark. Another important point to note on the squeeze of the small and micro enterprises in this country. We have a situation where the government is boasting. They've done so in the last budget debate. They will do so, I expect they will do so in the next budget debate, in this upcoming budget debate. They are boasting about the increase in non-energy exports in some cherry-picked sectors. But the truth is that manufacturers, and especially these SMEs, have been forced to sell their goods on the export market in an effort to gain or bring in scarce foreign exchange. You see, when they sell their goods on the local market, they get TT dollars, but they have to repurchase their raw materials with foreign exchange, US dollars. So as a result, many of these SMEs who are not being favored by the banks, who are not a part of the monopolies, of the growing monopolies, they are opting to sell their goods on the export market versus the domestic market so that they can get paid in US dollars so that they can purchase their raw materials in US dollars. This is the real reason for the priority of exports now today. And so while this government boasts of how well they are doing in the non-energy sector, here's what the anticlimax is of this situation. When these SMEs increase their exports, this government then punishes them by withholding their VAT refunds. That is what the government does. The government, namely the Ministry of Finance, by withholding VAT refunds, has basically decided to take an interest-free loan from all of these manufacturers, the large, the small, in this country. They have decided to take an interest-free loan in the billions of dollars. You see, as of March of 2023, the Minister of Finance came to the Senate when questioned by a former independent senator. I don't know why she's former, but a former independent senator. Maybe she asked too many tough questions. But a former independent senator, in questioning about the amount of VAT refunds owing, the minister had to come to the Senate and admit that the amount owing as of March 2023 was a whopping $7.8 billion in VAT refunds to the manufacturers in this country. The highest that we've seen. I think under the People's Partnership Administration, it might have gone up to $4 billion and come down, etc. But under this government, it has gone to $7.8 billion. The minister then came in a mid-year review, if I recall correctly, and indicated that the government's solution would be to pay between $1 to $2 billion from the consolidated fund to repay these VAT refunds, and then further went on to offer some $3 billion in bonds, in VAT bonds, in exchange for refunds, to provide for refunds for these manufacturers. So we see this scheme, another scheme that will obviously increase the national debt, a $3 billion bond that would mean that taxpayers would still have to fund for this government's carelessness. This was meant, by the way, to be done before the end of this financial year. We are fast approaching the end of the financial year and a new budget debate. So, we are calling on the Minister of Finance today to come clean with the population. We are calling on the Minister of Finance to be transparent with the manufacturers here today. We are calling on the Minister of Finance to indicate to these manufacturers how much of the between $1 to $2 billion promised has actually been paid to manufacturers. We are also calling on the Minister of Finance to come clean and let us know how much of the $3 billion in VAT bonds have been issued. And finally, on this matter of VAT, we are calling on the Minister of Finance to tell us today what is the current amount of VAT refunds owing to manufacturers in this country as at the end of August 2023. The minister cannot hide. We will come in October in the budget to ask these questions again. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I close, after seeing this level of incompetence by the Minister of Finance and his ministry, after seeing this failing economy, just like how we have seen this government fail through the Minister of National Security as it pertains to crime in this country, we call upon the removal of Colm Imbert as the Minister of Finance. Minister Imbert must go. The PNM government must go. But there's still 2 more years to go before an election. So we call on the Prime Minister to remove the Minister of Finance and put a competent Minister of Finance in place. However, a government could only be allowed to run an economy into the ground when those with the levers of control turn a blind eye to mismanagement. So that is why we say, secondly, the Central Bank of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in the last 3 years has become an ineffective paper tiger that rubber stamps the minister's disaster plan and acts as a strictly as a reporting entity today, Senator Mark. The inaction and the silence coming out of the central bank governor on matters of national debt and the government's irresponsible utilization of bonds indicates that he may not be fit for the role in leading one of the most critical institutions in Trinidad and Tobago for its monetary and financial stability. Therefore, the United National Congress calls upon the immediate removal of Dr. Alvin Hilaire as the Governor of Central Bank of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And finally, ladies and gentlemen and members of the media, not just the opposition, but I personally make a plea to the various business chambers in this country, the various business chambers of commerce, the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, and civil society. We call upon you, do not follow the example of the central bank and reduce yourself to simple press releases and convenient engagements with the media. In order to save the small, medium, and micro businesses in this country and to protect consumers from this PNM maladministration, it will take the efforts of all stakeholders, every stakeholder in this country, to get involved in a national conversation on matters of the economy, on matters of energy, and matters of crime. Do not allow the PNM to compromise your integrity with paper-thin senatorial appointments and prioritization of your fundraisers. Your role in civil society is not to be submissive to any government, regardless of who the government of the day is. Especially a government who clearly shows they do not care about many of your own members. Because of this foreign exchange crisis, VAT refunds, decimation of the SME sector. So I ask the business chambers throughout Trinidad and Tobago to be bolder, to be louder, to be consistent in your communication to the plight of businesses in this country. Do not be afraid to offend any minister, any prime minister, or any financier in this country. To be docile while languishing in a failing economy is tantamount to self-sabotage. Stand up for businesses of all sizes. Stand up for what is right in the administration of this country's economy. We call on businesses and the chambers to stand your ground. Stop sitting in silence. As we approach the budget on October the 2nd, we implore you, the media and citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, not to take the PNM or the Minister of Finance's mama guy and old talk. Our economy is in shambles. Our society, in every aspect, is suffering greatly as a result of the failures of this government to manage the affairs of this country. Do not let the PNM lies distract you from Trinbago's realities. The citizens are not at fault for this foreign exchange crisis. The SMEs are not at fault for this crisis. The manufacturers are not at fault for this crisis. This is 100% a mess borne out by the workings of Balize House. So, I would like to thank the members of the media for allowing me to present the truth to the population of Trinidad and Tobago. And at this point, I would now like to hand over to Senator Mark, who will bring some more troubling details to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Senator Mark.
Yes, thank you so very much, my colleague and friend, Senator the Honorable Damian Leiter, for expounding on a very important subject matter relevant to the foreign exchange market of our country and the impact this recent decision will be having on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in Trinidad and Tobago. Ladies and gentlemen, Trinidad and Tobago is in dire straits. The foreign exchange crisis is only one element of that raging crisis that we are faced with. All of us would have seen a headline in the Sunday Guardian of September 17th. And the headline read, Naikwan in limbo. Let me share this headline with members of the press. And it talked in this article about their inability to get natural gas supply to run their plant. It also spoke about a cash crisis faced by this entity. And it also spoke about this entity seeking to reach out to financial institutions for further financing. Now, members of the media, when a dog becomes sick and the owner takes it to the veterinarian, to avoid any further suffering of that animal, appropriate steps are taken. Is a concept or name, it slips me now, to put that animal to sleep, to avoid any further suffering. Based on what we have seen, based on what we have read, Naikwan has been put to sleep. And I just want to read, before I get into my presentation, the opening line or sentence in the Sunday, September 17, 2023 Sunday Guardian report. Nykwan Energy has been forced. Listen to the word, eh? I want you to pay attention to the language. Nykwan Energy has been forced to put its plant to sleep, and it is now offline because it has neither natural gas nor permission to run its plant. It goes on further and it makes interesting reading. It said that, and this is coming from its founder and chief visionary officer, one Ainsley Gill. He is quoted as saying in that story that the GTL, which is gas to liquids plant, has been placed, and I quote, into an asset preserving silent mode. This is the language of the CEO and founder of Nykwan. Members of the media, what we are witnessing with Nykwan, this so-called meltdown, this so-called limbo, is what has been referred in the literature as state capture. Let me repeat. What we are witnessing today with Nykwan purportedly being put to sleep in silent mode is what has been called in the literature as state capture. Listen to the meaning of state capture. I am going to reveal to this country through this media conference what has happened in this situation. The literature defines state capture as follows. State capture has been defined as a type of systemic political corruption in which private interests, listen carefully, in which private interests significantly influence a state's decision-making process to their own advantage. End of quote. This is what state capture means. It is a form of political corruption, systemic political corruption, in which the private interests or the private sector influences significantly the decision-making process of the government to their advantage. I want to remind this press conference and Trinidad and Tobago, it was state capture that brought down Jacob Zuma, the former president of South Africa. Look at the literature on Jacob Zuma and the Gupta family in the private sector to understand where we are coming from. What is happening here in Trinidad and Tobago is a similar kind of episode, a similar kind of event that is taking place in our country. I want us to look briefly at what we would like to describe as the continuing saga of Nikwan Energy Trinidad Limited and some of the key players involved in this sordid saga. The play is the same. The actors have changed. Pay attention. The play is the same, but the actors have changed. Ladies and gentlemen, I have correspondence dated March the 5th, 2004, addressed to Mr. Kenneth S. Julian, at that time chairman of the Natural Gas Export Task Force of Trinidad and Tobago. In that particular letter, written by who? A gentleman by the name of Mr. David Loring. Let me spell that name for you. Loring. President and CEO of what? A company by the name of World GTL Inc. Look at here. I will make a copy available to the media. That was when the scheme was hatched, not only to destroy Petrotrin in November of 2018, but to introduce and to sell the people of Trinidad and Tobago a dream. A dream. They sought to experiment. They sought to introduce an experiment by importing and getting the Malcolm Jones board of directors at Petrotrin to agree to the establishment of a Petrotrin WGTL plant called gas to liquids. And they brought what is called a methanol plant out of the United States. Now, members of the media, I have a copy and I will make it available to you. So in 2004, Mr. David Loring writes on March the 5th to Ken Julian, floating this idea of a World GTL plant, which is a gas to liquids plant. Members of the media, nowhere in the universe did we have such a plant. That plant was the imagination of Mr. David Loring and his group in New York, communicating with Dr. Kenneth Julian to sell the idea. And you know what happened? They bought it. That idea was bought, lock, stock, and barrel. And to cut a long story short, Trinidad and Tobago invested 3.2 billion TT dollars, 3.2 billion taxpayers' dollars into a dream that never materialized. It turned into a nightmare. And by 2009, the Petrotrin World GTL plant was placed in receivership. Within 5 years, it went into receivership. But you know what is interesting? I have a document. It's called a retainer agreement. It is number 5600, deposited with the Department of Justice. It is an agreement dated the 10th of February between Alison Lewis, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Finance, and a gentleman, and she did that on behalf of the government, and what is called the AGA Group. AGA means Ainsley, Gill, and Associates, LLC, a firm registered in the United States, 1700 K Street, Suite 730, Washington, D.C. Look at here. This is on the 7th of February, 2004. The letter introducing WGTL to Ken Julian is dated the 5th of March. I am wondering if there's any connection. I am wondering if this is coincidental. This gentleman, Mr. Ainsley Gill, is now the CEO and founder of Nikewan Energy Trinidad Limited, that is now in limbo. Alison Lewis, who signed this document, making Mr. Ainsley Gill a lobbyist, receiving over $300,000 US every 3 months from 2004 to 2011. This gentleman became the CEO not only of Nikewan Energy Trinidad Limited, but ladies and gentlemen, in 2008, it is reported that Mr. Ainsley Gill, I asked him to deny it, incorporated in the United States a company known as Nikewan Energy LLC. So in 2009, the WGTL Petrotrin joint venture is placed in receivership. And what do we have taken place? The gentleman incorporates a company in 2008 called Nikewan Energy LLC. This gentleman remained as a lobbyist until 2011. When they signed him off, his last fees were equivalent to $4 million US. Members of the media, the rest is history. This company called World GTL, along with Petrotrin, was placed in receivership. The person who came forward to buy this abandoned plant, we understand from the research, was Mr. Ainsley Gill. He bought this abandoned plant. You know, remember, we invested $3.2 billion in this plant, and we never got back a cent. This plant is now sold to Mr. Ainsley Gill, who was a lobbyist from 2004 to 2011. He is buying this plant, making a bid in 2012. The deal is consummated by 2016, and he becomes the owner of this new plant. He calls it Nikewan Energy Trinidad Limited. You know how much he paid for that plant, members of the media? He paid the taxpayers. He paid you and me, the people of this country that spent $3.2 billion and got nothing in return except scrap iron. He gave the government, through negotiations, 10 million US in cash and 25 million US in preference shares. Look, I am calling on the Minister of Finance today to show Trinidad and Tobago evidence that Nykwan Energy Trinidad Limited paid into the consolidated fund 10 million US dollars. We never saw any evidence of 10 million US dollars. So we need to know, where did that money come from? Which account did it come from? When was it transferred? Is there any evidence to show that Trinidad and Tobago received that money? We would like to know. So, members of the media, what we are talking about is a sordid saga. Nykwan, WGTL, 2004 to 2009 in receivership. And that is part one. And part two is Nykwan Energy Trinidad Limited, 2009, 2012 to 2023. Members of the media, I want to tell you that we in Trinidad and Tobago have to look at some of the key players that were involved. I want to ask through the media to Mr. Ainsley Gill, were you involved in this initial thrust to foist on the people of Trinidad and Tobago? David Loring, representing the president and CEO of the World Gas to Liquids Plant Company? Or put it another way, was Mr. Ainsley Gill on the compound in 2004 when this idea was floated of a world GTL plant or model? We want to know this because there are some players involved that we need to get some answers from. We need to get answers from Ainsley Gill. Were you there in 2004? And are you still here in 2023? Were you there in, what was the role of Miss Alison Lewis in this whole scenario? Members of the media, what was the role? I have just shown you, and I will give you a copy of it. There is a retainer. There is a retainer document. And that retainer document, ladies and gentlemen, is signed by Alison Lewis. Alison Lewis happens to be, coincidentally, the vice chairman of Nykwan Energy Trinidad Limited. Just coincidentally. And coincidentally, Alison Lewis happens to be a director of the board of Republic Bank that issued a loan in July of 2019 amounting to 24.5 million US dollars to Nykwan. She is a witness. Her name is in the mortgage debenture document. We have her name here. So we want to know what was the role of Alison Lewis in this whole scenario. Members of the media, I want to tell you something. If the PNM was a holdings company, Nike would have been a subsidiary of that holding company. And I'll tell you and show you the evidence of the deep, deep interests of the ruling party in this company called Nike Energy. So we have this. We have some issues that we wish to raise with the people. Many concessions have been made to this company, and we want to know through our press conference today, how come this company got so many concessions from the government of Trinidad and Tobago? How come they were so lucky? How come they were so fortunate to get all of these concessions? Members of the media, this is Schedule 1 of the mortgage debenture, in which Republic Bank made available in the first tranche 24.5 million US. I didn't say TTA. I said 24.5 million US.
That's what the US go on.
Within a short period of time, they went back and they got $45.5 million. And within a short space of time, they went back again for 50 million US dollars. In all, 120 million US dollars. Now, as I said to you, members of the media, the people of this country own close to 32%, between 26 and 32% of Republic Bank. Let me tell you some of the elements in this scenario. Sweetheart arrangements, sweetheart concessions, sweetheart incentives for a company called Nike Energy Trinidad Limited. Dr. Rowley, the Prime Minister, has a lot to answer. He has to account to the people of this country. What proper cost-benefit analysis was done to determine the net benefit that will accrue to the people of this country upon releasing these incentives to Nike Energy Trinidad Limited? Members of the media, brace yourself. Put your feet on the gas pedal. Here are some of the sweetheart arrangement. The Minister of Finance approved VAT exemption under the Fiscal Incentives Act. So they pay no VAT under the Fiscal Incentives Act. This is in the document. The gentleman who owns this company has been given a waiver from the Ministry of Trade and Industry. You are not to pay withholding tax. No withholding tax for you. Withholding tax for others, but not for Nike. We also see in this document where the gentleman is given the authority, right, by the Water and Sewerage Authority to receive a supply and a permit for water. We don't know what is the agreement between WASA and NIQUAN. That is a secret document. So we don't know what sweetheart terms and conditions were given to NIQUAN. Ladies and gentlemen, there's something called an offtake agreement. You know what's an offtake agreement? When they produce what they call clean energy, diesel minus sulfur, all of those products go to who? Pariah. Pay or take. You have no choice. And here was the agreement. You pay the ongoing market rate or any higher price in the market for their products. That is the offtake agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a natural gas supply agreement. We have never seen that natural gas supply agreement. What we do know is that the Rowley administration established a special purpose state company called the Upstream Downstream Energy Operations Company Limited, only to feed NIQUAN with natural gas. 31 mmc, I think, TU every day they're supposed to get. We don't know what is the price they are paying for natural gas, because this too is a secret. We don't know how much they are paying for natural gas. So members of the media, you have the natural gas supply. You have, for instance, a lease agreement. I'll come to that. You have a supply from TNTech. You have a supply from WASA. Now, members of the media, do you listen to what I'm saying carefully? Members of the media, can you imagine our land, which is 4.4 hectares at Pointe-à-Pierre? The people's land was leased. We don't know at what rate to NIQUAN. NIQUAN has not paid any significant sums because we don't know. So we are saying, look, produce the lease agreement for our 4.4 hectares of land at Point Leases. All the scrap iron, all the equipment is being used as collateral by Republic Bank in order to back up the loan that have been accessed by these people. This is amazing, and we need to get clarification from these people on this matter. Now the question here, who are exposed? The people are exposed. If NIQUAN has been put to sleep, that is the company, and they are unable to meet their outstanding debt, which amounts to what we have seen so far, close to $250 million US. If they are unable to meet their debts, what will happen to the loan that Republic Bank advanced to them? Would those loans be written off? But we own 32% of Republic Bank. And if those loans are written off, how is that going to impact on the profitability of Republic Bank? Who is going to lose in this instance. So that is one area that we need to pay attention to. Ladies and gentlemen, NGC is being undermined. The government had no justification for bringing into being a special purpose company to supply natural gas to only one company, that is Naikwan. Why you didn't allow NGC to supply natural gas to that company? No, you brought into being a special purpose company called upstream, downstream in order to supply natural gas. You know the end result? Naikwan, for 11 consecutive months, did not pay upstream, downstream any money for natural gas. They have an outstanding bill of 19 to 21 million US dollars owed to upstream, downstream. Upstream, downstream is getting the gas from National Gas Company. So they in turn owe National Gas Company. So National Gas Company is owned 100% by the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So who is going to be affected by all of these things? All of these concessions that have been given to this company. All of these sweetheart arrangements that have been given to this company. The offtake agreement, the gas sales agreement, the fact that they owe us 10 million US and 25 million US in preference shares. What will happen? Who is going to take the bounce? Who is going to absorb these losses? Republic Bank have to come and tell Trinidad and Tobago who is backing these monies that they have loaned to Naikwan. And we understand it's a large sum of money. Could be in the range of between 70 million US up to 120 million US dollars. And that same Republic Bank that purportedly has loaned up to 120 million US to Naikwan is now telling you, the small businessman, the micro businessman, the medium-sized businessman, ordinary citizens who want to do online purchases, you cut people access to credit purchases from 10,000 to 5,000, but you were able to lend a company called Naikwan that never built and never run a parlor, much more to run a gas to liquids plant. And you take up 120 million US dollars, not Trinidad and Tobago dollars, US dollars. And you're telling the small, micro, and medium-sized businessman, you're telling the doctor, the dentist, the optician, the pharmacist, the people who have their children studying abroad and they have to pay education fees to the university, who want money for medical attention, they can't get access to foreign exchange. But you give 100 or you loan, I should say, 120 million US dollars to Naikwan, a company that has been put to sleep. So in other words, we need answers. How come FCB could find $85 million to lend Financial Cornerstone in Jamaica and purchase, right, another $30 million in share equity in Barita, and yet still they cannot find US dollars for ordinary people? Members of the media, we need answers from Republic Bank. We need answers from the Prime Minister. We need answers from Ainsley Gill. We need answers from Alison Lewis. This is a scandal. And members of the media, I want to tell you, before I take questions from you and my colleague, what we are witnessing in Trinidad and Tobago is A and V Part 2. We had A and V Part 1. We are now experiencing A and V Part 2. Let me explain. Ladies and gentlemen, on page 16 of Sunday's Guardian rather, I want members who have not read it, I want you to read it, right? This article tells you on this page, look at it carefully. Read page 16, where Ainsley Gill, the Chief Executive Officer and founder, is telling Trinidad and Tobago that they are preparing for arbitration. They are preparing to take the government to arbitration proceedings in London, courtesy the ICC. And they have hired King's Counsel, and they have hired a real reputable law firm to represent their interests. Members of the media, I want you to throw your mind back, A&V Oil won an arbitration against Petrotrin. It runs into the hundreds of millions of dollars. This company called Naquan has taken upstream, downstream company of TNT to the High Court to get an interim injunction. You know for what? For not supplying them, for breaching their natural gas contract. And that is what we believe is going to happen with this matter. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to pause at this time to let you know that Trinidad and Tobago is extremely concerned that this matter involving Naquan might be another A and V oil matter in which the people will be taken to arbitration. Naquan Energy will make a case for breach of contract, and the next thing you know is that the people of this country pay Naquan over between $5 and $10 billion. This is what we are facing with this company being put to sleep. And therefore I ask the question, when the Prime Minister talks about Magadog, Peter Tosh, treachery, ingratitude, sometimes I wonder, is that for real? Or is that for public consumption? What is going on here? We need to ask serious questions. That is why I started off, and I want to end my contribution today, my presentation today, by telling you, ladies and gentlemen, you see this headline? You see this headline? Naquan in limbo? It should read, the people of Trinidad and Tobago are in limbo. The people are in limbo because where this thing might end up is where we, the people, might be called upon to pay Naquan Energy Trinidad Limited hundreds, if not billions of dollars for breach of contract by the upstream, downstream energy operations company limited. Members of the media, I'll pause at this time and invite you to raise any issues that you'd like to raise as it relates to what my colleague said, Damian Leiter, and what I have presented. So the media is welcome to ask questions, or invited rather, to ask questions at this time.
Well, I'm kind of trying to look at a big picture of what future NIQUAN could have, because the term was it's being put in asset preserving sleep mode. It kind of reminds me of another plant that that you can think of. But and as with you don't want things to deteriorate. As presumably that you're in a situation so much money has been put into it already that you don't know if to continue to put in and it's US currency, or if this thing has to go for a time. So the question I would say is, what viability does the opposition see the whole thing having? I mean, given that there are all these should they have got this subsidy? Should they have got that tax break or not? I mean, I don't have the answer for that. But does NIQUAN have a future, or even if or does the plant, whether it's this management team or if the UNC came in, there's so many issues. I mean, it needs the injection of finances. It needs the gas supply. I mean, I'm just speculating here, but was the government supported it contingent on an expectation that the Dragon deal would come through, or that the Lauren Manatee, something? I mean, there are so many factors, but I don't know if you have like a broad vision of where you want this thing to end up, even if there's a future UNC government.
Our view, Sean, is that this whole model of gas to liquids really was a dream being sold by a chap called Mr. David Loring back in 2004. Now, with all the bright people available, the Petrotrin under the Malcolm Jones era, that whole dream turned into a nightmare. And the plant never came into existence because there were so many cost overruns that even Credit Suisse, that advanced close to $400 million US in loans, had to withdraw, had to call in their money. So they had no choice but to put this company into receivership. Now take into account that nowhere in the Western Hemisphere is such a model at work. Nowhere in the Western Hemisphere has natural gas been processed into diesel and into other fuels. This is the first country that was seeking to experiment with that model. And we failed in 2005 to 2009. What kind of due diligence did the government involve itself in? What kind of expertise did the government draw upon before it bought shares into that company called NIQUAN, knowing full well that the company, there's no history, there's no record of any success stories, any part of the world with this particular gas to liquids model or project. So in the absence of a Petrotrin plant, and you are trying to cut corners to save costs, the end result is two explosions. Two explosions. And you know what is even more worrying? Why would a prime minister and his minister of energy protect NIQUAN against the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Imagine within 1 month of the prime minister turning the sod, cutting the ribbon, to start this plant. Within 1 month, a massive explosion rocked the whole of Marabella and Vistabella. And you know, the Prime Minister refuses to provide that report to the country, to the Parliament, to the stakeholders. Alan Lane Ramkisoon, may his soul rest in peace, perished in another explosion sometime in June of this year. We do have a report, and the Prime Minister has the gall to come to the Parliament and tell Trinidad and Tobago that NICWAN is a private legal entity, and therefore the government cannot release that report. You ever hear such madness? A man dead. An explosion rocks 2 major communities in South Trinidad. And we don't have access to the reports. Because why? The Prime Minister tells Trinidad and Tobago that a private firm is more powerful than the state. A private firm is more powerful than the people. A private firm is more important than knowing how Alan Lane Ramkisoon died in that explosion. That is madness. And that is why we don't understand up to this time why a government would use taxpayers' money in that cavalier way to invest into a plant that is a dream. It failed in 2005, 2009, and now it has failed a second time. Yet still, we are pumping taxpayers' money through sweetheart agreements and arrangements, through sweetheart incentives, through sweetheart concessions, all at the expense of the people. And the whole project has failed, Sean.
I mean,
it has failed.
Do you consider the government started, they thought, look, let's give it a try, because based on the success that Point Lease has had in the petrochemical, they say, well, you know, here's an idea, let's give it a try. But does it seem as if they've come to a point, I'm not sure of the timeline, but it came to a point where they said, well, the injections of funding and then injections of gas supply, it's just like, we don't have the gas, we're trying to rearrange the Atlantic LNG, that there's this whole different trains. Is it, do you know, like, what does it seem to be that they had initially tried to be quite generous, but that now it's just become like no end in sight to the thing? And is that a correct path for government to take, if they're now at loggerheads and Magog and this and that?
Sean, I would simply respond by telling you, if that explosion did not take place, the plant was open in March, the explosion took place in April in 21. If that explosion did not take place, and if the explosion did not take place in June of 2023, you and I would know better. We would be no better off in understanding the cost-benefit analysis of this project. Only private interests would have been wallowing in richness, and we the people would have been none the wiser. It is because of the explosion that we have all these inquiries, and because of the explosion we might end up before an international arbitration committee, and that could go anywhere. It could go in favor of the company called NICWAN. It could go in favor of the government and people of TNT. We don't know where it will go. But had it not been there in terms of the explosion, these fellas would have been eating lamb, ham, and jam. And we the people would be none the wiser in the circumstances.
On the world, I'm just looking at the world situation. I think Qatar is a place that produces a lot of gas. Have we researched to see if they've ever tried this technology? Because it seems to be, And also, you know, the spectrum of technology, you know, everybody's doing all the green, the windmills and so forth, but there's still some green hydrocarbons, which the natural gas is, and they're trying now to say this is a low sulfur form, that you're converting the natural gas to longer chain hydrocarbons, but without all the impurities. And they say it burns more efficiently than your standard diesel that is produced by what is it, fractional distillation, I think it is.
As far as we are aware...
So where's the technology? Is it a viable technology in terms of the shift to green energy?
As far as we are aware, Trinidad and Tobago was the first country in the Western Hemisphere to experiment with this model of gas to liquids. We don't know of any other experiences in the Middle East or in Qatar, but as you have said, that probably warrants some further inquiries. But insofar as we are concerned, in the Western Hemisphere, there's no country in the Western Hemisphere that has experimented with that model thus far. Yes, ma'am?
Your call for the removal of the central bank governor, Alvin Hilaire. Is there a replacement you have in mind?
Well, I think what my colleague said is that, given, a governor is supposed to be autonomous and independent in his decision making and transparent. We find this governor and so on is a bit laid back, and he's not sufficiently transparent, and he doesn't give the appearance rather of independence. So we feel that, having regard to how he was reappointed and the changes that was brought to the Central Bank Act, reducing the term of office of a governor from 5 years to 3 years, is really a slap in the face of the independence of such an office holder. And in those circumstances, we feel that he is not coming out there and speaking to the population on monetary policies in a proper way. Look, this foreign exchange crisis. Who are the real users of our foreign exchange? Who are they? We don't know. You have a minister blaming the small people. You go online, Amazon, to buy something that you want to buy. He's saying, don't do that. You stop doing that. You are wasting foreign exchange. But what about the other big players in the system who are getting hundreds of millions of dollars and utilizing for the governor of the central bank has a very important role to play in these matters. Foreign exchange is the lifeblood of our country. And if you don't have foreign exchange, economic activity will grind to a halt. And how can you allow a bank that is receiving from the central bank foreign currency called US in exchange, because they purchase every so often, the central bank sells 500 million US dollars to what is called authorized dealers, and Republic Bank is an authorized dealer. How come the central bank is silent? This is the point that the Honorable Damian Leiter is raising.
And if I could expand on that, as Senator Mark speaks towards transparency coming from a central bank governor, we would have thought, like the former central bank governor, was very open and transparent, was able to publish the top recipients of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. Because that's the question on the lips of many business people in this country, especially small, medium, and micro enterprises in this country. How is it that they have to line up for $300, $400, $500, but yet these, I would say, newly minted monopolies, because that's what's happening in Trinidad. This government is making monopolies out of these large companies. Now, we're not against large companies. They employ thousands of citizens. They pay their taxes to the state. So we're not against it. But what the United National Congress is for is fairness. What we're for is equity. And how is it that SMEs cannot get access to foreign exchange, but these large monopolies are getting access to millions of dollars in foreign exchange. And so on the top of everyone's minds are who are those persons getting this preference in US dollars? The previous central bank governor was transparent, published it. So maybe we should challenge the central bank governor to be transparent and publish the top recipients of the foreign exchange in this country.
Even before the slashing of the credit card limits, we have seen persons lobbying for an increase in foreign exchange. So there has been an issue of accessibility of foreign exchange.
Yes.
So you mentioned different issues from the slashing of the credit cards right back to the refinery. But what are some solutions that the opposition proposed?
Look, the solution is simple. You know?
Remove the PNM.
Listen, for 9 years, the PNM has not issued any real licenses to these energy companies to engage in deep water exploration for gas and for oil. So all the oil that you see coming ashore now, from Touchstone and from Woodside and BPTT, those were licenses given by the People's Partnership Government. So what the government has failed to do is to really incentivize. I'm not saying to sell the sink, the kitchen, the bathroom to the multinational corporations. I am saying that since we don't have the capacity as a country through our companies to explore for oil and gas, as our BPTT, EOG, BHP, now called Woodside, among others, Touchstone, you have to provide some incentives. And you have to do it in an adequate kind of time frame. So now 9 years have passed. What is the state? Do you know that under the People's Partnership in 2014, we produced 4.3 billion cubic feet of gas per day? You know what it is today? It is down to 2.6 billion cubic feet. We have lost almost a third. And it is being predicted, unless we find gas, or we get gas out of the Dragon Field or the Lauren Manatee, by 2025, 2026, we will be down to 2.2, 2.3. That is a crisis of epic proportions. Take into account as well, in the last central bank economic bulletin, it was reported that in January to July of 2023, the energy companies sold less than 10% of their foreign currency, their US dollars, to the banks because of the crunch that they are experiencing. Last year, during the same period, they sold less than 18% of foreign currency, US dollars, to the banks. So last year, January to July, 18%. This year, January to July, 9.3%. How can Minister Imbert blame you for buying $70 on Amazon via the internet? You can't be responsible for that. The micro businessman, the pharmacist, the dentist, the doctor, the optician who has to buy material for $8,000, you want to cut that. To do what? That is why we are saying that there needs to be fairness and equity in the allocation and distribution of scarce foreign exchange in our nation.
And let me just go a little further, because Senator Mark alluded to the issue in the energy sector. Now, this government comes budget after budget to speak and boast about diversification of the economy. That is everything we are not seeing happening coming out of this government. When you see that exports, and I said it earlier, when non-energy exports went from $700 million US dollars, $704 million US dollars, to now $450 million US dollars. That tells you today that we are exporting less we are bringing in $250 million US dollars less in revenue into this country. Why has that happened? When you look at the exodus of many companies, foreign direct investment, $1.7 billion US in foreign direct investment leaving our shores. Some of that comes from the energy sector, yes. But when you look at Lever Brothers, which was a major exporter, not only for domestic production, but an exporter to the region and beyond. All of that has left us. Why? Because the ease of doing business has gotten more difficult in Trinidad and Tobago today. Trading between borders has gotten worse. Getting approvals from TNTech and WASA 4 times harder today than it was between 2010 and 2015. Trying to work with the port to import your products, the congestion at the port, the bureaucracy at the port. And this government will want to come and put the blame on customs officers. But really and truly, what they have done is they have understaffed and under-resourced those persons working in the port. This is why we have this backlog here today, which is costing importers, whether retail or manufacturers, which is costing these companies thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if I'm not mistaken. There was complaints coming from major companies that sometimes one company in particular, I will not call the name, but they indicated that they spend sometimes $2 million a year in rent and demurrage charges. And then you have the issue with VAT refunds. What company in their right mind, what international company in their right mind, let alone a local company, is going to invest millions of dollars in this country when they cannot get back their VAT refunds? I think it was a very astute and prominent businessman by the name of Arthur Lockjack in the last budget debate indicated that there was some over $10 million or more he was waiting for in VAT refunds. So, and foreign exchange continues to spiral out of control. That's another issue with ease of doing business. Crime in this country is a major contributor to the decline in the ease of doing business. It is now costing manufacturers, companies, retailers, thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment for security, thousands of dollars every month in security guards and money movers, etc. So the government has failed us across the length and breadth of the ease of doing business in this country. And when you see that happening, that is why you see a decline in exports, an exodus of foreign direct investment. And then my last point was further diversification of the economy. They come every year and speak about tourism, but they don't arm the tourism minister with any ammunition or any budget. I don't know if I could blame the Minister of Tourism. I have to blame the government. I have to blame the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, the Cabinet. When we see the decline in tourism in this country, more than 70% decline in arrivals, international arrivals into Tobago. Less and less people coming to Trinidad to Carnival because of the crime situation in this country. When we see that the Kamla Prasad Bisesa administration built an aquatic center, a cycling velodrome, that was to foster not just the development of athletes locally, but also to bring sporting tourism into the country. When you think about the Children's Hospital, which is no longer the Children's Hospital because this government is so callous and there's no love for the children, they pull along the sign saying children. Mm-hmm. And up to this day, if it weren't for the COVID pandemic, they would not have opened that hospital. And now I think the hospital is closed again. But that children's hospital would have been the only children's hospital in the Caribbean region outside of the United States. Again, not only for the domestic citizens, but also the possibility of a regional throughput coming into the country, medical tourism. This would have fostered hotels, restaurants all around that area. This would have brought foreign currency into the country. But we've seen tourism decline. We've seen manufacturing and exports decline. Even though they beat their chest, what are they comparing this increase in manufacturing and export to? Are they comparing it to the COVID pandemic? Of course, the COVID pandemic, when the country was shut down, there was less manufacturing, less export. But compare it to 2010 and 2015, under the People's Partnership led by Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, and look at the figures, the economics, the economic indicators, the figures, the numbers, they don't lie. So so to answer your question, it is about diversifying the economy. It is about taking us back to what Kamala Prasad-Bissessar was doing with exports, with medical and sporting tourism, with tourism in this country. It's about really and truly diversifying the economy, and we are running out of time.
Yeah.
We are running out of time.
I think that to wrap up,
Yeah.
I'll just say, to just consolidate, based on your concern, I think we have collapsed very badly on the ability of our country to attract foreign investment. Could you imagine that we are now a net, we are minus $941 million US in foreign investment? We have a net outflow of close to $1 billion in Trinidad and Tobago. That is unheard of. So when you are not attracting foreign investment to get new streams of revenues, both for domestic consumption and foreign consumption in terms of importing goods through foreign exchange, US, you are in trouble. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago has literally failed the country in the last 9 years. They have not attracted in 9 years any significant investment into our nation, and that is contributing as well to the foreign exchange crisis that we are talking about. And when he shut down this company called Petrotrin that used to bring in between 300 to 400 million US dollars, all that contributed. So it's a number of factors that have contributed to the decline in foreign exchange. And don't come and blame the ordinary people in our country and the micro and small business people who are employing 3 and 4 and 8 people and blame them.
200,000 people.
And come in your budget on the 2nd of October and increase online purchase taxes to discourage you and others from being able to access the internet shopping model. That is wrong. And he's not telling the truth when he tells us that you, the ordinary people, the micro and small and medium-sized business people, are responsible for the shortage in the supply of foreign currency in Trinidad. It is a lie. It is an untruth. It is a falsehood. And we must condemn the Minister of Finance for misleading the nation when he knows better. Ladies and gentlemen.
Just final question, right? Just as a strategic topic quickly. We see a letter sent from the Prime Minister to the opposition to have a sit down and to propose their plans to discuss crime. Who can we expect to see as part of that opposition team meeting?
All I can tell you, just put on your seatbelt. I don't want to tell you mash your gas. But very shortly, the opposition leader will be communicating with the Prime Minister, and she will, in fact, be identifying in her letter her team. I think protocol demands that, this particular phase be done in a proper way, meaning that the Honorable Leader of the Opposition has to write to the Prime Minister. He wrote to her, she's writing to him. When that letter comes out, we'll make it available to the media. I cannot predict, I don't want to preempt, and I don't want to be presumptuous. Okay? Okay? So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Sorry to have kept you so long today, but we thank you, and we look forward and so on to you coming to our next media conference. We'll have a media conference on Friday. We will alert you to who will be with you on Friday, and then we come back as well at our regular Sunday media conference. Okay? So thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Do have a wonderful evening and good afternoon to all.